Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage. In this video we're going to talk about tie rods. Now whether you have an older vehicle that has two tie rods, one on the left and one on the right, that has an inner and an outer tie rod, or a newer vehicle with rack and pinion steering that only has one tie rod end, they're both critical in adjusting the steering of your car. And when you have play in there, it's not good because your steering wheel is loose. And the tie rod ends are what adjust the the toe in of your wheels. There are three adjustments for your steering. There's caster. There's four. Five. There's three really. Caster, camber, and toe in and toe out. Then there's extreme caster, extreme camber. That is so stupid. Why would you do that adjustments? I have no idea why people do that. It looks so stupid to me. But anyway, you got to have these done right. So let's go and take these out and take a look at it. Oh, so first, last video I talked about these pieces of steel and I asked people if anybody knew what they were. Now that's kind of unfair because unless you really worked with this particular piece of equipment, you would have no idea what these are. These are knives. I know they don't look like knives, but they're called knives. A long time ago, I used to work at the Lackawanna steel plant, Bethlehem Steel Lackawanna Mill, which was the fourth largest steel plant in the world. Really cool place to work at. Over 20,000 people worked there. Big basic oxygen furnaces, bar mill, rod mill, plate mill. They did rolling, cold, all kinds of stuff, galvanizing of steel. Real cool place to work. But I was the cold mill mechanical foreman, which is a fancy word for maintenance supervisor for the cold mill, which was for the pickle mill, the tandem rolling mills, slitting mills, skin passing mills, annealing furnaces, and I had a bunch of millwrights that worked for me. It was really cool. But anyway, these are from a piece of equipment called a Halden flying shear, just like the one you see here. And what this would do is when the pickle mill is the first part where a coil of steel gets uncoiled, it goes through an acid dip to clean it off, and then it gets cut to width. And when the steel is going through the bath, it's got to be a constant sheet of steel, so the coils of steel have to be welded together. Well, the beginning part of the coil is not square and it's not even thickness, so it has to be chopped off. So what happens is the coil of steel gets fed into the mill, it gets uncoiled, and it can be anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch thick, and maybe 35 to 60 tons for a coil. This sheet gets fed through a bunch of rollers to make it flat. And then as it's, as it's going up to the welder to get welded to the other sheet, it has to get cut square. And the sheet is moving as it's going up to the next mill. So these are knives, and there would be a bunch of them. You'd have a bunch of these things put together to make, I don't know, 60 inches, 70 inches, so there'd be a bunch of them here. And you have a top and bottom one. They would work like this. And as the sheet's coming through, the shear is moving like this with the steel, and it would chop like this. It would come through, chop, chop, like that. So these are knives. Now I don't expect anybody to know that unless you actually worked on a Halden shear and a flying shear, but they are really cool. And they can only be ground, they have to be sharpened. They can only be sharpened so many times, and when they got to be sharpened and they were ground and they were too small, we would throw them away, and these were in the garbage. And instead of throwing them away, I'd take them because they were excellent pieces of steel to use for the brake job like I just did. Let's get back to the tie rod. So once you have your vehicle properly supported, come and do for the inspection here. Now aside from the movement, because of either the worn joint or post or spindle, look for things like a boot that's lifted like this. We have space in there where water probably has been getting in there. If I look inside here, well, the boot on here is cracked. It seems to be cracked all the way around, and probably rusted inside this. The inner tie rod is probably rusted. So that one's in pretty bad shape. So the first trick, taking out the screws, taking out the cotter key, getting off the castle nut, and getting the tie rod end out of the spindle. Now, if you're lucky, and if that nut is not rusted onto the stud, sometimes you get really lucky and it'll come right off of there. This looks like it was done recently, so it might come right off. There we go. Today is my lucky day.
Now would be a super lucky bonus day if I tap this and it comes right out. Super lucky bonus day, came right out of there.
Now, if you're not having a super lucky bonus day like I had, you'll have to either cut off the nut, which means you'll have to grind it, cut it, whatever you want. And if you have a hard time getting the tie rod end off of the spindle, you need something called a pickling fork. You can buy this anywhere. It's just a fork that's tapered, and you hit it with a hammer. And if you put it between the tie rod end and the spindle, as you hit with a hammer, just prise it off, and it'll just take this right off the spindle.
All right, so when you do that, I can feel this, and I can feel flat. I can feel some flat spots in there. It's not smooth anymore, which is bad. That's why you get play in your steering when you're driving down the road and you feel play backside, left to right, and you don't have real stiff steering. That's because the ball in there gets slop in there. So I'll do the same thing for the inner joint. So let's do a quick inspection on this tie rod here. We'll look at the outer joint here. This is the outer one. The boot here is pretty loose, and there is a good amount of grease in there, so that's not too bad. But as I move the spindle, there's a real loose spot. So right here it gets really loose. It's not stiff at all, so that was contributing to some of it. Look at the other end. The other end, the boot, dry rotted, coming off of here. Let me rip this off, see what this looks like. Okay, almost no grease inside this one, and this is probably mostly the problem. And this one, super loose. You look at the, if I can show you that, the spindle itself and the ball is loose, so it's, even though it's supposed to move, there's a lot of play in there. So this, the inner and outer are both bad, which is causing the steering to sway back and forth. And you really want to change these when you have to, because what can happen is if this doesn't have enough lube in there, if it's not working right, this will either break off or the ball will come out of the socket, and then you lose your steering, which is obviously bad. Now, if you had to do this and you're on a budget, you certainly could just change the tie rod ends. But when these things get so old, breaking these bolts and getting this collar to separate can be really difficult. Plus, a new one is only like $8, pretty cheap. Now, there is a difference between the inner and the outer. One is left-handed thread, one is right-handed thread. So if you go to put this together and you try and put it together a normal way, like this, it goes together. I'll turn this around just to show you. If I go like this, it won't thread in because one side is right-hand thread, the other one is left-hand thread. And the reason for that is that when you put this together and you go to do the alignment or adjust the steering, when I turn this, I can make this, I can take these things and make them longer or shorter just by turning the center sleeve. Now the question is, when you put this together, how long do you make it? It's a steering part. If it's too long or too short, it's going to change your alignment. The car will either pull to one direction or it'll be towing, it'll be too much. So you could do a bunch of things. You could measure it. I mean, you could try and measure, see if you can match the old one. But the easiest way I found, I've been doing it forever, is to count the number of threads that are sticking out of the joint right there and match them on the new one. If you look at the starting thread is right there, and the starting thread is in the same spot on this, so you can be sure that they're going to be fairly accurate. And I have these adjusted exactly to the same amount of threads on both sides. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my grease fitting in here. I'll fill these up with grease and we'll put it in. rod end took care of it. Now, if your wheel alignment was fine before you changed it, all you have to do is take it for a ride and see if it still drives straight. So the steering was off just a little bit, and I need to make this rod a little shorter, so I'm going to rotate it one turn to make this rod a little shorter. I'll take it for another ride.
It only took that one adjustment to get the steering nice and straight. Now, changing your tie rods or tie rod ends is a great way to freshen and tighten up your steering. Thanks for stopping by Pete's Garage.